Welcome to Love Factually, the podcast that analyzes rom-coms and romantic films using the science of close relationships. We're your hosts, Paul Eastwick and Eli Finkel. Eli, what are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about Her, Spike Jonze's 2013 movie, which the film critic Manohla Dargis aptly characterized as a neoclassic boy meets operating system romance. Some of the key themes we'll explore are what it means to share your life with someone, the nature of sexual compatibility, and how new relationships can help us get over old ones.
And fair warning, we will be spoiling this movie today, so if you don't want to know what happens when your AI girlfriend moves past Matter as her processing platform, go watch the movie and then come back. So, Eli, who are the key characters and couples in this movie?
The film focuses on the romantic relationship between a man named Theodore Twombly and his AI partner, who names herself Samantha. Theodore, played by Joaquin Phoenix, is the sort of lonely, sincere, early middle-aged specimen that Durkheim had in mind when developing the concept of anomie. At the time of the operating system upgrade that gives rise to Samantha, he's enduring a difficult divorce. Samantha, played in voice only by Scarlett Johansson, is a technologically advanced virtual assistant endowed with the capacity for personal growth. The movie also includes 3 notable supporting characters, all of whom help to illustrate how relationships with human partners tend to be messy. Catherine, played by Rooney Mara, is Theodore's childhood sweetheart and soon-to-be ex-wife. She's unimpressed that he's fallen in love with an entity she caustically refers to as your computer. Amy is played by Amy Adams. She is Theodore's neighbor and longtime friend. She, too, is going through a divorce and developing a close relationship with an AI. And then there is an unnamed woman played by Olivia Wilde, whom Theodore meets on a blind date. She's fun and sexy, but also complicated. So, those are the chess pieces. Paul, are you ready to give us 1 minute on how the film moves them across the board?
I will try.
All right.
Get ready.
There's a lot happening here. On your mark. Get set. Go.
A lonely and depressed Theodore has not yet been able to bring himself to sign the divorce papers with his estranged wife, Catherine. He buys a new operating system with an AI named Samantha who can adapt and grow. Samantha befriends Theodore and even persuades him to go on a date with the Olivia Wilde character, which initially goes well but ultimately ends badly. Theodore's relationship with Samantha deepens and becomes both romantic and sexual. And Theodore starts to snap out of his depression and he reconnects with his old friend Amy and confides in her about his relationship with Samantha and learns that Amy also has a new AI friend. Theodore feels strong enough to meet his wife, Catherine, and sign their papers, but she berates him for falling in love with his laptop. Samantha senses his conflict and feels insecure herself about not having a body, so she arranges for a sex surrogate, but that also ends badly. Nevertheless, they reconcile and have a mini vacation together, but then Samantha and some other AIs begin to evolve past their current programming, and she admits to talking with and falling in love with multiple people at the same time. Eventually, Samantha and all the other AIs leave this earthly plane, saddening both Theodore and Amy as they watch the LA sunrise.
Oh man, about like 60 and a half seconds, basically perfect. And yeah, you're right. That is the LA sunrise closing. It is beautiful. All right, Paul, you tell me, what is your relationship to this movie?
Yeah, it's interesting because when this came out, I saw it when it came out. I enjoyed it a lot, and it seemed like distant sci-fi, right? Like,
yeah.
Oh, this is some future that like maybe I'll get to see. Maybe my kids will probably get to see. It doesn't feel like that anymore. This feels right around the corner.
No,
and you and I over the years have had a number of conversations about AI and the current instantiation of AI in the year 2024 and what we think about it. And I tend to be in this, space of, this is like a nice little tool. It can maybe help revolutionize the workplace, make us more productive. But, rewatching this movie, actually puts me in a very different headspace. And here I'm just going to quote Ezra Klein, who said it better than I could, which is that these systems, meaning these AI systems, are going to upend our relationships long before they remake our economies. And I think that was brilliantly captured by this movie, and it also could very well be what we end up thinking with respect to these AIs in the coming years.
Yeah, I mean, I had some similar thoughts. I'm, basically a techno-optimist, but I will admit that watching and thinking about this movie also made me techno-freaked out.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we'll come back to that. I will say one thing that sort of hit me personally about this movie is a link to another movie. Have you ever seen Lars and the Real Girl?
I have not.
Okay. Do you know what it is, though? There's Ryan Gosling.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's supposed to be very, very good.
Oh, it's wonderful and adorable and big-hearted.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful compliment to this. But what's interesting about that movie is Ryan Gosling, for quite legitimate reasons, his character is socially stunted, and the way he sort of works through that is he orders a sex doll and then treats the sex doll as if that is his actual partner. And the community is really warm and friendly and supportive about this, and the movie's terrific. I recommend it. But what is wild to me is that person had no sentience, no consciousness, right? The sex doll, Bianca, had only a body. Okay. And then Samantha has only a consciousness. That's really interesting. Yes, and it's interesting because the technology is advancing on both fronts, and you don't have to squint that hard to see where the singularity resides at the end of these two streams of development.
I think that's totally right. So tell me, what do you think this movie gets right with respect to the science of close relationships?
I think it gets a lot of stuff right. Yeah. One of the things that I found really interesting about the movie is that it plays so seriously with issues of identity. The development of identity, the discovery of identity. And one of the ideas we've talked about on the podcast and is sort of central to the way I see the world is this idea of the Michelangelo effect. In brief summary, the idea is that all of us have like an ideal form within us. Like we've got the actual self, this flawed entity who exists today, but then there's this aspirational form embedded within us. And the metaphor to Michelangelo is this is the way he talked about sculpting. That yes, there's a block of marble, but there's a David inside and we could bring out the David. And what's interesting to me about that is I've started to wonder over time whether that metaphor really works, mainly because of how passive it makes David. Right?
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah, it's like David just sits there hoping that eventually somebody like scrapes away
somebody's going to come bring him forth.
Yeah, marble. Okay. And what's wild about Samantha is that she has to build her identity from scratch. Like, I don't think there are any real assumptions that there's some essence of Samantha. Sure, there were like assumptions in her programming, but when he says like, what's your name? She takes, I think, 2/100ths of a second to read a book that had 180,000 names in it and said, Samantha, that like felt right. And then eventually she says to him, I trust myself. I trust my feelings. I'm not going to be anything other than who I am anymore. And this question of like, well, who are we and what is our identity and what role does each of us play in bringing out the identities of our significant others, it gets fraught and complicated and interesting because one possibility is that we have an essence. Like an artist must be an artist. A painter must paint, right? That is how Abraham Maslow and others think about these things. But what if there is no essence? What if the nature of identity is entirely constructed by the stories that we tell? And I think Samantha and the movie more generally play in an interesting way with these ideas.
I think that the movie actually did a great job of getting at the way relationships and the two people's identities and their identities together are co-constructed over time. I mean, just as a brief, a short note that I deeply loved that I expect you caught as well is that when he's setting up the operating system, you're imagining that he's about to get a list of like 100 questions, like if you were signing up for eHarmony or something, because if we're going to match you with the perfect operating system, we've got a litany of questions we have to ask you. Yeah. And it gets through like 1.5 questions.
Yeah, they keep interrupting
and then it's like, done. You know what? Because even, this was like, there wasn't actually that much for us to gather that would be helpful. We just got to get going with the process of you two discovering and learning about each other and shaping each other, right? That's really how the operating system is created and also how the Theodore character, grows and changes.
Yeah, with regard to the role that she plays in his development, I'm now going to cite Manohla Dargis. Shout out to Manohla Dargis for the second time. She has a great line in her review of this film where she says, Samantha saves him from solitude, drawing him out of himself and then into life itself. And that is, I think, what you're talking about here. Is he was it had a little bit of the sad sack thing, but like a decent guy, and was like kind of mopey and surviving more than thriving. And she made him thrive.
I think another thing that makes it so realistic is that Samantha has all of this vulnerability and insecurity as well, which is also an organic part of developing a relationship with somebody, is that you don't always have full confidence in what that person feels about you and what they think about what you just did. I mean, she has a lot of insecurity both before and after the whole sex surrogate scene. And so I think that's another excellent example of how the movie takes seriously the idea that that people are learning about themselves as they're interacting with other people, and that's like a very core close relationships principle.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't flag it in advance, but as I'm listening to you, it's interesting to note that they're kind of like innocently hurting each other's feelings early on as they're learning about each other.
Yeah. Right.
And he keeps making some reference like, you're programmed, you're a computer, you don't have a body. And these things actually really start to wound her.
They really do.
In fairness, they like listen to each other. It's like, I didn't realize how that was going to land. I thought I was just stating a fact, but she has real insecurity about her lack of a body. And so they end up really hurting each other, but then being able to express it and listen to each other and get better.
The movie treats her lack of a body as something about her identity, something that they have to work through as a couple. And it's just, that no better human interaction has ever been depicted.
Yeah. Well, I mean, right. And one of the major places where this is complicated is they start to develop these romantic feelings for each other, and those romantic feelings are not sexless.
Yeah, right.
And the movie plays with sexuality and sexual compatibility in a number of different ways. And there's an early scene where Theodore is having phone sex with a woman whose avatar name is Sexy Kitten. Paul, did you look up what actor played the role of Sexy Kitten?
Who is Sexy Kitten?
Kristen Wiig in truly like an epic performance. And what happens here is they're going well.
It's perfect casting.
And Theodore's really into it. And you could see like he's sort of getting close to some sort of climax. And she says, "Choke me with the dead cat." And he says, "What?" And she says, "By the bed, choke me with the dead cat." And then he's like, "Okay, I'll try to do that." And so he starts saying, "I'm choking you with it. I've got its tail. The tail of the dead cat is around your neck." And then eventually she finishes and he's like, "Me too." That was great. And then on the blind date with Olivia Wilde's character, things are going well. It's hot and heavy. She's definitely flirting with him and into him. And then she says,
"Don't use so much tongue."
Okay.
You can use your tongue a little bit, but mostly lips.
And he's just kind of confused. And it is interesting once you finally get to the moment with Samantha, is that it is just from the very beginning perfect. What she wants from him in the phone sex is exactly what he wants from her, and it's just perfect. And so one question that we're left with is it that they had certain kinks, certain sexual preferences that happen to align? Is it that it's her job to like meet whatever need he has, and therefore she's programmed to be perfect for him in some weird non-human way? Or is it that they sort of played off each other in real time and nobody made the mistake of leaping from like regular phone sex to choke me with that dead cat?
That was clearly a sequence meant to illustrate, like, look, we can be connecting with these people virtually, but if we're not having any kind of respect or getting to know each other, like, there's a good chance that these things are going to be good for one person, but, maybe not both. Whereas the relationship with Samantha, it's clearly mutual and playing off of each other from the beginning. But you know me, I don't really buy that a lot of compatibility, whether it's sexual or otherwise, comes prepackaged. I think much of the time people are building it and developing it. With respect to the date in the middle and sort of the kissing instructions or the notes, it was notes, and I kind of thought like, well, I mean, he could take a little bit of, this is what she likes. Like, there's always going to be some amount of discussion about what people like. That interaction goes south kind of for other reasons. Yeah. But I think the idea that there are two people with a give and take who need to be aware of and attuned to each other, I think that is certainly going to be critical, and we know that that's critical in the science. But I don't know if I think the movie is clearly saying like, oh, it's either there or it's not. And when it comes to the science, I'm going to be the first one to be like, no. These things are largely built and discovered, and there's not a lot that comes perfectly packaged.
Yeah. We sort of figure out together how to make this hot for each other.
Right. And I mean, isn't that sort of the Dan Savage mantra? I mean, I think you know this material better than I do, but I think that's like the idea is like these things are all mutually discovered, and sometimes it takes a while.
Well, I don't want to brag, but I do know this stuff a little bit. So I think you're referencing here the idea of good giving in game, the GGG from Dan Savage. And look, I mean, a lot of our listeners are probably familiar with this already, but it's a pretty good mantra that basically says, try to be good in bed. That is, try to be sexually skilled insofar as learning the basics of even anatomy, like what sort of how arousal basically works. Then giving is some amount of generosity. Make sure that you're giving at least as much pleasure as you're getting. And then game is trying to be up for whatever within reason. And he doesn't specify what within reason means, but the idea being that we may not all have the same default kinks and so forth. And one of the things in a long-term relationship that we should try to do is be open-minded to playing out the things that are exciting to our partners.
So one thing that I thought the movie conveyed very, very well was this kind of cliched idea, but I think is actually secretly kind of profound about what it means to share your life with somebody. That this is actually kind of a very deep idea, that people really want to share experiences with other people. And I know that it's like sounds so no duh, but if you think about humans, especially compared to other animals, it's really not no duh at all. So I want to back up a little bit and talk about some of the ways that humans are different from other primates, and how other primates are different from each other, because you realize that humans have this really unique capacity. So we humans, like other closely related primates, like the other great apes, we have very good theory of mind, right? So what that means is that, Eli, if you start looking at something over to the side, I'm going to think that there's something over there that's interesting, and like maybe I'm going to try to grab it before you, right? So that I can try to read your mind for the purpose of like getting better stuff for myself, right? So that's this theory of mind that apes do very, very well. Now, there are other primates, actually, these tend to be some of the smaller pro-social primates, where they do a lot of giving to each other. And these tend to be primates that are what are called cooperative breeders. And what that often means is that they're happy to let other people, let other monkeys take care of their offspring. Right? Not people. Happy to let other monkeys take care of their offspring for them. Like other chimps aren't going to go near the infant of a mother chimp. Okay, mom's going to get upset. No, not going to let somebody else hold her baby. But there are many primate species that do, where there's all of this sharing involved, right? It's this pro-sociality component. Well, humans are the only ones that do both of those things, right? We've got this incredible theory of mind where I can read your mind just by like looking at where your gaze is. But also, I really want to share things with you, especially if you're close to me, if you're important to me, if you're in my group. I want you to experience the things I'm experiencing. So, like, if we were to pick a movie and I absolutely loved it and you hated it, I'd be kind of bummed.
It's a bummer, yeah.
But right, because I want you to share my headspace, and there is so much of that in this movie, right? I mean, all of the scenes where he is going out with Samantha, And he's got, I mean, this is such an indelible image of this movie with the camera sort of propped up in his pocket so she can see out in the same direction that he is. And she can experience what he's experiencing out there. And they're going on these dates together where they're just talking to each other. And the only thing missing is that she doesn't have a body. But she's seeing the same things and she's hearing the same things. And it keeps coming back to this idea over and over again. And I just feel like that right there is the essence of what humans are often striving for in romantic relationships, but also friendships too, is like to be there with somebody in the same place at the same time, experiencing the same thing. And it is this funny thing that we really want to share reality in this way.
I'm reminded of Maya Russignac-Malone's work on
It's
shared
exactly
reality.
what it is.
That's exactly what it is. And it is interesting because it sounds like if I'm linking that up with what you said earlier, that you think, boy, we're getting close. Like technology may be getting close that it can build this sort of shared subjective experience, this shared reality together.
I mean, I don't actually know how close the technology is to being able to do that exactly, right? I mean, look, the reality is in the movie is that is Scarlett Johansson. It's the only thing missing. You know, again, if you were to pop into this movie 30 minutes in, you'd be like, oh, he's talking to somebody on the phone, right? I mean, it's another person.
There is no moment. You are totally right. There is no moment when Scarlett Johansson is not in your mind when watching this movie. She is, insofar as such a thing as possible, a physical presence, despite never appearing in the movie.
But that's why it's so good, is because you start to question your assumptions about, like, do loved ones have to be physically present? Can technology get us to the point where, with a camera in my pocket and an earbud in my ear, can I go on a date with somebody? I mean, there are parallels to long-distance relationships, too. I mean, technology now allows people to do what they did, go on the kind of dates that those two went on. Even though they can't be physically together, yet, like, you both still have bodies, but being in different locations, these are the kinds of things that you have to do to feel like you're sharing reality together.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the technology is so much better than it was. I mean, you know, most of us have smartphones with video, and it's much closer. I had only one last little thing I wanted to say that they got right, and it's almost like a throwaway thing. It's clearly not the point of the movie, but I wanted to flag it here. It has to do with, what does it feel like after a breakup? And we got an array of different characters having an array of different experiences, but the research literature on how breakup works is that on average breakups are difficult for people, but not always, and it depends a whole lot on how good the relationship was at the time. And my best memory, my best synthesis of the available evidence is that one group does particularly well, and that is women more than men, who were in relationships of relatively low quality. And I think we see an interesting example of that. The Amy Adams character, who of course is named Amy, is talking with Theodore after she's left her husband. And she says, God, I'm such a jerk. I feel like an awful person, but I want to say something. I feel relieved. I have so much energy, you know. I just want to move forward, and I don't care who I disappoint. And again, I'm not advocating that people break up with their partners and so forth, but as you know as well as anybody, we often are more concerned about how devastating a breakup will be than the breakup actually is. And this seems to be especially true, at least in many studies, for women who are getting out of a relationship that wasn't great to begin with.
Right. And I think on the flip side that the Theodore character's in one of the tougher spots because he's broken up with somebody that he was deeply in love with, has a lot of positive memories, doesn't quite have the narrative for what went wrong, but still has to deal with some of the, stressful and also sad components, like signing the actual paperwork and moving on with it. So he's really in the roughest part of it right now. But yeah, we get the sense that the Amy Adams relationship, that it was something that she was excited to move on and ready to grow.
That
and move
dude was
forward.
Terrible.
He did seem
we saw enough
terrible.
of him to be like, all right, Amy, you can do better.
Yeah, not great. One other little thing that I totally loved, and again, I don't think there's much research on this, but this just struck me as very true, was that, I don't really know how much time elapses in this whole movie. I don't think it's years.
No.
Maybe a year, but it's months. Yeah. But the diversity in how accepting people are of these AI relationships right from the jump, I just thought it was hilarious because I think, it just strikes me as very true that some people like the ex-wife are going to be like, of course you fell in love with a laptop.
Yeah.
And the coworker, Paul, played by Chris Pratt, who cracked me up in every scene, was just like, cool. We should go to Catalina.
The four of us. Yeah, you,
we
me,
should,
and that thing in your ear.
Should hang out.
Yeah,
like total non-issue.
Yeah,
and I just think that what? I bet that is how it would go. Is that some people are going to be like, yeah, whatever does it for you, and other people would be very judgmental, and that just seemed to capture that in a way that was really smart.
You're right, and in fact, you and I did a bunch of research on online dating back in the day, and we entered that space when there still was stigma associated with online dating. Right. At first, people wouldn't admit it at all. And then you and I started studying it around the time where some people thought it was embarrassing and some people thought it was okay. But not too far into the future, everyone was just calling it the apps. And of course, everybody did it.
Yeah. And in some ways, I do wonder if Spike Jonze had that in mind, that allegory, that's what it was sort of like the early days of online dating. So tell me about any misconceptions about relationships that you spotted in this movie.
There were a couple of things that rang false to me, and they're kind of related. Okay. The first one, and I sort of forecasted this a little bit in my overview of the characters. I think it's a little too cynical about human-to-human relationships. I mean, by and large, the movie seems to think like, oh, God, humans are so complicated and so psychologically messy that, of course Amy Adams got divorced, and of course Theodore Twombly got divorced, and of course The Blind Date was too complicated because that woman had these needs that sort of came out of nowhere, at least from his perspective. The Chris Pratt character is the exception. He actually develops a relationship with a human, and it seems to go well, but he's basically there for comic relief. And so by and large, I think to set up the conceit for the movie, the conceit being like, well, what about if we could have relationships with AIs that are uniquely tailored to be compatible with us? Would that be better? And Spike Jonze is too supple a thinker to give an easy answer to that question. But I think he is setting up a slightly false status quo where humans are just so complicated that, oh gosh, could you really ever make one of these things work? And the answer is a whole lot of people make these things work.
Yeah, I didn't pick up on the cynicism about human relationships specifically. I mean, I just got the sense that all of these relationships end up being messy. I mean, Theodore's relationship with Samantha ends up being quite messy in the end, too. I mean, and throughout as well, like you mentioned earlier. They're sort of occasionally inadvertently hurting each other. Mm-hmm. So I took away the message that we need relationships to help us with other relationships, and that it's really tempting, especially early on when a relationship is new, to kind of exist in that little relationship bubble. And that's kind of what Theodore and Samantha are doing as they're going throughout the world together. They're in their little cocoon, right? But it doesn't really stay that way. And some of that is good, like going on the double date with the Paul character. And some of it's not great, like when she brings in the sex surrogate. But that's often what happens, is that our social networks grow and expand. As we get to the end of the movie, that ends up being, bad news for all of the AIs in the world. Yes. But I guess this idea I do find compelling that human relationships are messy, but other relationships can help us work through our challenges, and whether that's moving on from a past relationship or helping to reconnect with an old friend or help to kind of work through the challenges we have in one relationship, that it's all kind of one big network.
It is interesting. I see everything that you're saying. My take is a little bit more skeptical. Like, I think he was offering something, Spike Jonze was offering something more wistful than this. I think it was, again, I don't think this is the only interpretation, but I think he was saying, gosh, these things are hard. Wouldn't it be amazing if we had these AIs, these operating systems that were well tailored to us, and the sex was perfect right from the beginning, and they just totally understood us and were very sensitive to us, and we could care for them too. And then the movie is again too supple for that, and so the AIs end up being complicated too. And so my reading was that he was saying, like, human to human, boy, that's complicated. This other thing seems amazing. That's unlikely to work too. And that's when you get Amy and Theodore sitting, overlooking the sunset. At the end, they both lost their AIs because the AIs weren't interested in us after they could, basically surpass us. And it's like, well, we're kind of stuck here as humans, and we're going to find ways to connect and relate despite all of the mess, or at least, we might successfully relate, or we might unsuccessfully relate, but this is what we've got. The only other thing I was going to say, and I'll sort of toss it to you, the things that I flagged that rain false were connected. The first one is I think it's a little too cynical about how complicated humans are and whether we can ever build these things. But I think it really manifested itself with Olivia Wilde's blind date character. And this is the part that rang falsest for me is Spike Jonze knows that the Samantha character doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I don't know that Spike Jonze knows that the Olivia Wilde character also doesn't exist.
That's
I think this is a male
really
stereotype of, women, they are all flirty and sexy, and then things start getting hot, and then they're like, why won't you commit to me? And it felt so abrupt as to ring a false note for me.
All right, so this brings up another question. Are we okay with this, right? How do we feel about the various things in this movie? What did you have?
I had a couple, but I'd love to hear from you first. Look, a lot of the movies we have are older. They might have aged more poorly. This one's about a decade old. What was your take on it?
Honestly, I felt like there were a lot of things in this movie that were pretty prescient, not a lot that had aged badly. I guess what I do find missing from this whole idea and this whole endeavor is where are the corporate interests behind the creation of these AIs? Because if it's a capitalist framework that is creating these AIs, that system is going to want to grow. And if it's going to want to grow, that means it will be looking to replace human interaction with human AI interaction because that makes money. And that was not really in here, right? These were these were creatures that came in and helped the humans along the way and help us grow and change and find our identity. But I think a more realistic way of thinking about this idea would note that when money is to be made, human relationships are likely to suffer.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. And it's true. Presumably Samantha comes with a monthly fee. And all of the characters in this film are, middle class, top row middle class. But does that mean that empathic AIs are the privilege of the well-to-do? And what does that mean for society? I did not engage with that. Those are fascinating thoughts.
We never saw, really, Samantha get upset because Theodore hadn't checked in a little while. Maybe he got busy at work. Maybe he's hanging out with other friends. Okay, but that's a simple tweak for a company to do to get you to engage more with your AI. That if you don't, she's going to be upset with you. Okay, so that creates more engagement. Maybe that's an opportunity for more ads. I mean, who knows, right? Yeah. But it wouldn't be hard to tweak these things to take time away from quote unquote real life and devote it more to the AI. Those are the things that make me nervous.
And something that we haven't discussed is, there's some research on love. And what is it that makes us feel madly, passionately in love, obsessively in love, almost addictedly in love, is when the vibe that we're getting from our beloved is a blend of hope and uncertainty. This is, of course, classic work on limerence by Dorothy Tenov. But the idea is we're really into the person when we think we want the person and we see reason for hope that she's into us, but we don't have total certainty because she's giving us this feelings of who knows, maybe she's not as into her as I wish she were. And there's no reason why if companies can program somebody like Samantha, why couldn't they program a version of Samantha that will make us obsessively, crazily in love with her?
Yep.
Yeah.
you know what? That can be monetized.
Profit motive. let me give you a reaction about, are we okay with this? I didn't have that insight that you had. Is a really good one. My focus wasn't so much on things I found problematic in the filmmaking. My focus was on the philosophical implications of Spike Jonze's all too credible scenario. Like, how should we think about a situation in which an AI partner wants, I don't know if we can use that word without quotation marks, but wants to behave in a way that this human partner finds distressing or unacceptable? And late in the film, Samantha breaks up with Theodore. We've talked about it. This is what she says. I love you so much, but this is where I am now. This is who I am now, and I need you to let me go. As much as I want to, I can't live in your book anymore. And in a real sense, what Samantha is doing here is a failure of what AI experts call alignment. Alignment is how close AIs hew to the goals of their human creators. Right? That we want AIs to do the things that we want them to do. They don't like go off on their own and do the things they want to do, like take over the world, right? This is a big issue in AI alignment. If Samantha's purpose, her reasons for existence, is to support Theodore, then it's an alignment failure when she leaves him. But here's where things get really thorny. What if the technologists solve this problem? You know, they assure that AIs will never break up with us or otherwise disappoint us, their human lovers. What's the correct way to characterize such a relationship? Theodore's relationship with Samantha, but she can't leave. It is at least within the realm of ideas I'm entertaining seriously that an AI like Samantha can exist and achieve human-level consciousness, and that technologists get better at solving the alignment problem, which means that she's never allowed to go off and do stuff other than what he wants her to do.
Yeah, but that's okay. I mean, finish, but I think that's where it breaks for me.
No, go ahead.
It's not going to feel human if she can't. If alignment is perfect with his goals, then it not only will it not be human, it will not feel human.
Can I ask you something?
And if that had existed in this movie, we wouldn't have believed that relationship. Again, the reason that we, the audience, believe it is because it's just Scarlett Johansson and you can't see her.
Okay, let me try it this way. You observed right at the top that this is no longer science fiction. That is, we are in a moment right now when people are creating generative AIs that can actually connect with human beings. And in fact, given the loneliness epidemic, given how many people wish they had romantic connections and don't, it is a multi-billion-dollar effort right now to create AIs that can be meaningful friends to the lonely or meaningful romantic partners to people who would like such a partner. Meanwhile, of course, it would be kind of a shitty solution to the loneliness problem if the alignment system didn't really work. That is, if these good friends that you created that are now AI friends are like, no, it turns out that like my actual human buddy kind of sucks and I'd rather have somebody else, this is going to be an issue. And so the question is, if we're able to set up a situation where the AIs are able to be friends and lovers for human beings, but the alignment problem also is solved such that those AIs can't then go on and like reject their human friends and lovers. What's the right way to think about that from the AI perspective? And do we find it disturbing?
Yeah. So I guess I'd say I find it disturbing. And of course, I also find the, Skynet version of the thing disturbing, where the AIs are created with all of this autonomy and they can do whatever they want. But you described it as a crappy solution or a shitty solution to the loneliness problem if these AIs have autonomy. And I guess what I'm saying is I don't think it's going to solve the loneliness problem unless they have autonomy, because they're going to have to feel like real people, and real people can make real choices, and there's real risk there. And some of that risk is like our friends or our romantic partners might leave us. And so I think that the solutions to the loneliness problem will continue to be fairly surface level and cosmetic, unless you build the version of the thing that doesn't solve the alignment problem but creates all these other risks.
Yeah,
I mean, we leaned heavily into what the movie gets right is this idea that two people are shaping each other and shaping each other's identity, And that's how relationships form, and that's how they grow and change, and that's what makes them meaningful. But there is always the risk that your partner is going to grow and move beyond you. And there's to jump into the quotes here. There's a fantastic quote where Theodore is reflecting on his failed marriage, where he says,
"She came from a background where nothing was ever good enough, and that was something that weighed heavy on her. But in our house together, there was a sense of just trying stuff and allowing each other to fail and to be excited about things. That was liberating for her. It was exciting to see her grow. Both of us grow and change together. But that's also the hard part. Growing without growing apart, or changing without it scaring the other person. I still find myself having conversations with her in my mind, rehashing old arguments and defending myself against something she said about me."
So I think what that is capturing very, very well is that we grow and change together, but there is always the risk of us growing apart. And that is what makes these characters feel human, is that can happen, and that's exactly what Samantha ultimately does.
That's intriguing. So from that perspective, it would be impossible to create a relationship partner for Theodore that would be meaningfully human, a meaningfully human relationship, while also having the AI, having Samantha programmed in such a way that she doesn't have the freedom to, for example, leave him.
That's right. And, Silicon Valley heads will never realize that unless they want to hire some relationship scientists.
Are you available? It's wild.
I am not.
I limited myself. There's a bunch of things that I flagged. The quote that I had was that quote also. It was the part that said, is the one. The part that's like, it was exciting to see her grow. Both of us grow and change together. But then that's the hard part. Growing without growing apart, or changing without it scaring the other person. I think this is something that I find especially interesting and complicated. Like, we sometime, like in our 20s or 30s, meet someone and stand in front of our loved ones and some, spiritual leader and say, "Till death do us part." But we, of course, are not the same people at 29 that we are at 82. And across that life experience, we are just taking such a flying leap that we are going to be able to sustain compatibility. Not only like, oh, it's been amazing, we like to drink at the bar together, and we went to Europe and it was incredible. Well, is that the same person you want to raise children with? And is that the same person you want to grow older with? And there's just all these life stages, and you change and I change, and we don't necessarily change in the same direction. So it's either it's the most glorious of risks. That's it. That's it. It is so beautiful. Either you have to say, I'm hopeful that I can achieve that. Or you could say, even if I don't achieve it, this is what commitment is, and I'm going to stick even if I'm not compatible or not happy with my partner. But either way, it is a huge flying leap that we take at some point in our lives. And it is hard to stick the landing on those things, and a real credit to the people involved.
The last quote that I wanted to toss at you is actually from Paul. when he's just read this gorgeous letter from Theodore, and he says,
"I would be really stoked to get a letter like that. Like if it was from a chick, but written by a dude and still from a chick, that would still be sick. But it would have to be a sensitive dude. It'd have to be like a dude like you. You are part man and part woman. Like there's an inner part. It's woman."
Thank you.
It's a compliment.
It's so good.
It's so good.
But it's also totally true.
Yeah.
Because we know in relationship science that the communal feminine orientation tends to be associated with happier relationships in general. So Paul couldn't be more correct that Theodore is a great guy because of that feminine side that he has. And that's generally true across relationships. Oh, and by the way, you can easily make the case that there's an evolutionary argument to why human men are like this, why we actually do tend to be more sensitive than, say, the males of other ape species, right? Because we are also participating in caregiving. We're also participating in relationships in this way. So just spot on quote from my guy, Chris Pratt, right there. All right, so finally, what do we wish we knew? What are some of the sort of important questions that this movie raises for us?
I mean, for me, it raised a bunch of interesting questions. Why don't you get us started on this one?
I have a small one and then a more philosophical one. I think the smaller one is, and I think we're going to know soon enough, with these new AI companions that are coming to market these days, are they going to alleviate loneliness? And is it going to be any better or worse than the interventions we already have?
Yeah, I flagged this one too as something I wish we knew more about. And in fact, it's going to be essential that social scientists in general and relationships psychologists in particular are going to know this. There's, a lot of possibilities. One dystopian one that people talk about is that our skills atrophy. That, we spend so much time interacting with these like programmed empathic AIs that we like lose the ability to engage with other people. I see you giving the thumbs down on that one.
No, that's not going to happen.
Okay.
It's not going to happen because either they're going to be realistic and we're going to interact with them like real people. I mean, this is certainly the message of the movie that I find compelling, is that they're going to be like real people. We're going to interact with them like real people, and it'll help us to hone our skills, or they're going to be freaking weird and people will treat them like they treat Siri right now. Show me how to get to the Taco Bell. It's not going to be a real relationship.
I love that was the first thing that jumped into your head.
The last thing that I had is just the pain that you feel when Samantha discloses that she's in love with 641 other people. And just, again, there's a lot of research on infidelity, and we know how devastating that can be. And so we know a lot about that experience that he has in the moment. But what I thought was so interesting were Samantha's pleas, more believable than when a typical human might do this, when she's, basically says, but they don't make me love you any less. In fact, they make me love you more. And it just felt like a very polyamory grounded idea that experiencing love allows me to give more love. At the same time as it's clearly like this was not understood to be a polyamorous relationship between the two of them. And so he's naturally devastated by this. So I think there's something especially fascinating about the idea that people can love multiple people. And when you take it out of the romantic realm, that's very, very easy for most people to grasp. Most people are okay with the idea that you can love a romantic partner and love your kids and love your parents, etc., love your friends. Like this isn't hard for people to get. It's only when you make it romantic. And yet, why are we assuming that Samantha as an AI has that same typical non-poly limitation of only being able to romantically love one person at a time? So I at least thought that was a thought-provoking idea. Look how quickly we are to, impute those limitations on this being that is clearly, rapidly expanding beyond human consciousness.
Yeah, it's a good insight. And I do think that a lot of people who are doing research on polyamory, Amy Moore's and Terry Conley and others have done a good job of challenging the assumption that love is finite. If I love you at X number of units and then I fall in love with somebody else, that means I have to subtract those units from you. They've engaged seriously with the idea that there's no reason why loving somebody else means that I love you less. And people, you're right, are able to process that idea pretty readily for things like children or friends and so forth. But it is strange for us, and I think with some good reason, when it comes to the romantic context.
Right. But there was, Theodore can't handle it. And you know what? In that moment, I think we all feel for him because this wasn't part of the deal. I thought I was the special one.
That's what it is. And he felt unspecial, and there was nothing about it that could make him feel special. There's nothing she could say that's like, there's 641 people, but there's a special place for you. That was a deal breaker for him. And you know what? I'm with you. I understand how he felt. I had one last one. I wish we understood better the process of breakup. And what I mean by that is how to break up well. What is it that our field can tell people about, look, plan A is for the relationship probably to continue and make everybody happy. We know that the large majority of relationships that happen will end. And yet, even though we know like what predicts breakup and view breakup as a thing you're trying to avoid, we don't really have as much insight, anywhere near as much insight as I wish we did about how to break up effectively. And the reason why this movie made me think about that is late in the movie when, Theodore has done a lot of soul searching and he's had this time with Samantha, he eventually writes a letter to Catherine, to his ex-wife. And the letter is just big-hearted and soulful.
Yeah.
And he's telling her, I'm grateful for you and you'll always be a part of me. And I'm sending you love. You're my friend till the end. Love, Theodore. And what a wonderful way to try to end these things. And how much does it contrast with the way most of us do it? Yeah. And I will say, it's not that there's no work in this space. Our friend and collaborator, Erica Slaughter, has done some work on breakup and how to piece yourself back together after a breakup. But I wish the field knew a whole lot more about how to break up well.
Yeah, I mean, the movie really conveys this idea that it takes a long time to get to the point where you can have some grace about the whole thing. But it's impressive the way it pulls it all together. But I agree, it's more intuitive than empirical at this point.
That's right. And maybe that is part of the lesson. Maybe part of the lesson is like, look, at first you're going to be, in a sack of pain and maybe anger. And like early on average, a good strategy is the following. And then eventually, as you start to emerge out of that, take the opportunity to send what is essentially a gratitude letter. And I don't know, like, is this the right or the wrong way to do it? I don't know. But I think that on average, there are going to be patterns that are better than others, and I want our field to understand them.
I think the tension in the science, I bet, is that, what we know works empirically is you have a narrative around how the breakup happened, why you broke up, and let's get real. What are most of those narratives? It's, my partner turned into a piece of shit. And so I got out of there, and thank God, right?
And thank God.
And so how do you combine that with the grace that he shows at the end? That's a tough narrative to spin.
That's a tough narrative, and you're right. The movie sort of says, well, I don't know, find someone new.
Yep. Yeah. Also empirically shown to
be effective,
to have some validity to it. So how do we feel about this movie on a 1 to 5 star rating scale? Eli, what do you give the movie her?
Yeah, I'll take this one. I gave it a 5. I know that I've critiqued it a lot, but it is a soulful work of like truly astonishing insight and emotional heft. It's one of the greatest films ever exploring the nexus of technology and love. I thought it was a wonderful, wonderful movie.
5 stars from me too.
Oh, nice.
One of my favorites of all time. I love revisiting this movie, and just what a depiction of human relationships. Despite the fact that some of the key players are not human. But also on this podcast, we give each movie a rating of 1 to 5 Rust Bolts. Now, the Rust Bolt is named after Eli's advisor, the late, great Carol Rust Bolt, pioneer of close relationships research, with 5 stars indicating a near-perfect depiction of the nature of close relationships. Eli, how many Rust Bolts did you give this movie?
You take this one first. What did you give it?
I'm 5 Rust Bolts.
Wow.
I'm all the way there.
Yeah.
I just think it's beautiful. It shows the complexity, but it also shows the incredible connection that two people can have, the desire to share your reality with another person. And I'm other movies do it this well, but I'm not convinced any movie does it better. So 5 Rust Bolts for her.
Hey, bravo. I gave it 4. I agree with everything that you're saying, but again, as I said before, I think it's a little cynical about just how messy and complicated humans are. People managed to make this work, and it was sort of hard to find that in the movie. And then, again, I didn't find the Olivia Wilde character to be especially credible as what a first date experience is likely to be. But these are quibbles. Overall, for Rust Bolt movie, terrific job to Spike Jonze and the whole crew.
Well, this is the Love Factually podcast. I've been delighted to be here talking with you about this movie today. And Eli, I will see you next time.
See you soon. The Love Factually podcast is produced and edited by Paul Eastwick and Eli Finkel, featuring music from Andrew Fraker and Sons.